You had the Stan Smiths, the Rod Lavers, and then even into the 80s, the McEnroes and guys like that. Basketball culture, sneaker culture really tried to replicate what tennis was doing at the time.
Anyways, Beckett here is he's our resident sneakerhead, and he has his finger on the pulse of that culture. So I think he's got a question about basketball and tennis.
Hey, Tim. So obviously shoes and basketball, especially lately with the more mainstream adoption of sneaker culture, they're so closely linked. I was kind of wondering, why do you think, where vaguely does that come from, that how shoes are so important to basketball, and what are some lessons that tennis can learn from that in terms of developing a more relevant and mainstream culture?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting discussion, because I would actually go back quite a bit further. I'm obviously older than both of you guys, but I'm not going to say I'm this old. But if you go back to the 50s, 60s, and 70s, tennis culture was the lead sport culture. It was the individuals. You had the Stan Smiths, the Rod Lavers, and then even into the 80s, the McEnroes and guys like that. Basketball culture, sneaker culture really tried to replicate what tennis was doing at the time. If anybody watched The Last Dance, which obviously so many sports fans did, you even saw, when Jordan signed with Nike, one of the reasons he didn't go with Converse was because they had Magic Johnson, Larry Bird, all the big names at the time in the early 80s, but they were marketed as a group, right? They were marketed as the NBA shoe, not Magic shoe or Larry shoe or whatnot. Jordan really, in the 80s with Nike became an individual, just like a McEnroe or a Stan Smith or the guys before him. So then that really, then you have, now that we're marketing as an individual, which is really the first time a team sport has done that. Even now you think of the NFL, they don't really market as individuals as much. Baseball, starting to more and more, but basketball really took that on, modeled after tennis. And then really, though, you have a culture, right? The demographic that's buying sneakers, the young demographic, obviously younger than me, they're into basketball. That's the sport that's relevant to them for that demographic. So then the sneakers, you can merge with the lifestyle, they're following the Hardens, the Currys, the Kyries, whoever. And so what those players are saying and wearing is what becomes important to that demographic. So for tennis to get back into that lead cultural spot, and I think they've seen some headway. I mean, you had Wilson collaborating with Bathing Ape. You had them collaborating with Supreme. I mean, Wilson and Supreme together. I mean, I know it was a can of tennis balls, but still, I mean, Lacoste and Supreme. You've had some tennis brands collaborating with streetwear culture over the last couple years, and maybe not as much in the shoes. And I know you're probably going to want to get into the Nike basketball crossover, but I guess the long answer I'm giving you is that for tennis to get back into that upper echelon of cultural relevance, really, I think it needs to be that younger demographic has to care enough about the sport that they care what that sport is producing in terms of gear.
Interesting. So you're kind of saying there might be like a bit of tennis has migrated a little bit away from the younger culture of the people who play it, where it's not necessarily like the cool thing anymore.
Well, I don't think you can argue that tennis is one of the top sports in America. And I know you guys are, in Canada, so North America, obviously worldwide, tennis is one of the largest sports in the world as far as participation and even watching. But in North America, where a lot of the sneaker culture comes from, it's not one of the top sports, especially in that demographic of sneaker culture. So that makes it tough for tennis to have a strong base. They'll have some relevant moments, but to be the leading driver of that conversation is going to be difficult just with the culture. I remember I was talking to ASICS. They obviously make a great tennis shoe. I was talking to them about different colorways, and sometimes ASICS can be a little bit loud. If you think of their running shoes, there's lots of bright colors, maybe not always the hippest. But, when you talk about their tennis shoes, what was the number one selling shoe? It was the white. It was the all white. It's like there's a lot of the older demographic that just wants a good, solid ASICS shoe in white, whether they're going to the country club or they're just playing with their friends or whatnot. you know, it's not necessarily a true, you know, sneaker culture for tennis, although the brands would love for that to happen.